Good afternoon. This is knowledge time. Welcome, alchemists. Today I'll be reading from the book The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. Currently, I am in chapter 12, Connect to the Masculine or Feminine within you, the law of gender rigidity. Part 2, Keys to Human Nature. We humans like to believe that we are consistent and mature, and that we have reasonable control over our lives. We make decisions based on rational considerations on what will benefit us the most. We have free will. We know who we are more or less. But in one particular aspect of life, these self opinions are all easily shattered when we fall in love. When in love, we become prey to emotions we cannot control. We make choices of partners we cannot rationally explain, and often these choices end up being unfortunate. Many of us will have at least one successful relationship in our lives, but we will tend to have many more than were decidedly unsuccessful that ended unhappily. And often we repeat the same types of bad choices of partners, as if compelled by some inner demon. We like to tell ourselves in retrospect that when we when we were in love, a type of temporary madness overcame us. We think of such moments as representing the exception, not the rule, to our character. But let us entertain for the moment the opposite possibility. In our conscious day to day life, we are sleepwalking, unaware of who we really are. We present a front of reasonableness to the world, and we mistake the mask for reality. When we fall in love, we are actually being more ourselves. The mask slips off. We realize then how deeply unconscious forces determine many of our actions. We are more connected to the reality of the essential irrationality in our nature. Let us look at some of the common changes that occur when we are in love. Normally, our minds are in a state of distraction. The deeper we fall in love, however, the more our attention is completely absorbed in one person. We become obsessive. We like to present a particular appearance to the world, one that highlights our strengths. When in love, however, opposite traits often come to the fore. A person who is normally strong and independent can suddenly become rather helpless, dependent, and hysterical. A nurturing, empathetic person can suddenly become tyrannical, demanding, and self absorbed. As adults, we feel relatively mature and practical, but in love, we can suddenly regress to behavior that can only be seen as childish. We experience fears and insecurities that are greatly exaggerated. We feel terror at the thought of being abandoned, like a baby who has been left alone for a few minutes. We have wild mood swings, from love to hate, from trust to paranoia. Normally, we like to imagine that we are good judges of other people's character. Once infatuated or in love, however, we mistake the narcissistic for a genius, the suffocator for a nurturer, the slacker for the exciting rebel, the control freak for the protector. Others can often see the truth and try to disabuse us of our fantasies, but we won't listen. And what is worse, we will often continue to make the same types of mistaken judgments again and again. And looking at these altered states, we might be tempted to describe them as forms of possession. We are normally rational person A, but under the influence of an infatuation, irrational person B begins to emerge. At first, A and B can fluctuate and even blend into each other, but the deeper we fall in love, the more it is person B who dominates. Person B sees qualities in people that are not there, acts in ways that are counterproductive and even self destructive, is quite immature, with unrealistic expectations, and makes decisions that are often mysterious later on to person A. When it comes to our behavior in these situations, we never really completely understand what is happening. Too much of our unconscious is at play, and we have no rational access to its processes. But the eminent psychologist Carl Jung, who analyzed over the course of his very long career thousands of men and women with stories of painful love affairs, offered perhaps the most profound explanation for what happens to us when we fall in love. According to Jung, we are actually possessed in such moments. We give the entity person B that takes hold of us the name anime for the male and animus for the female. This entity exists in our unconscious, but comes to the surface when a person of the opposite sex fascinates us. The following is the origin of the anima and the animus and how they operate. We all possess hormones and genes of the opposite sex. These contrasexual traits are in the minority to a greater or lesser extent depending on the individual, but they are within us all and they form a part of our character, equally significant in the influence on our physique of the parent of the opposite sex from whom we absorb feminine or masculine traits. In our earliest years, we were completely open and susceptible to the influence of others. The parent of the opposite sex was our first encounter with someone dramatically different from us. As we related to their alien nature, much of our personality was formed in response, becoming more dimensional and multifaceted. With the parent of the same sex, there is often a level of comfort and immediate identification that does not require the same adaptive energy. For instance, small boys are often comfortable expressing emotions and traits that they've learned from the mother, such as overt affection, empathy, and sensitivity. Small girls, conversely, are often comfortable expressing traits they learn from the father, such as aggression, boldness, intellectual rigor, and physical prowess. Each child may also naturally possess these opposite gender traits in him or herself. In addition, each parent will also have a shadow side that the child must assimilate or deal with. For instance, a mother may be narcissistic rather than empathetic, and a father may be domineering or weak rather than protective and strong. Children must adapt to this. In any event, the boy and the girl will internalize the positive and the negative qualities of the parent of the opposite sex in ways that are unconscious and profound. And the association with the parent of the opposite sex will be charged with all kinds of emotions, physical and sensual connections, tremendous feelings of excitement, fascination, or disappointment at what one was not given. Soon, however, comes a critical period in our early lives in which we must separate from our parents and forge our identity. And the simplest and most powerful way to create this identity is around gender roles, the masculine and the feminine. The boy will tend to have an ambivalent relationship to his mother, then that will mark him for life. On the one hand, he craves the security and adoring attention she gives him. On the other hand, he feels threatened by her, as if she might suffocate him in her femininity, and he would lose himself. He fears her authority and her power over his life. From a certain age forward, he feels the need to differentiate himself. He needs to establish his own sense of masculine identity. Certainly, the physical changes that occur as he gets older will fuel this identity with the masculine. But in the process, he will tend to over-identify with the role, unless he identifies with the feminine role instead, playing up his toughness and independence to emphasize his separation from the mother. The other sides to his character, the empathy, the gentleness, the need for connection, which he absorbed from the mother or were naturally a part of him, will tend to become repressed and sink into the unconscious. The girl may have an adventurous spirit and may incorporate the willpower and determination of her father into her own personality. But as she gets older, she will most likely feel pressure to conform to certain cultural norms and to forge her identity around what is considered feminine. Girls are supposed to be nice, sweet, and differential. They are supposed to put the interests of others before their own. They are supposed to tame any wild streaks, to look pretty, and to be objects of desire. For the individual girl, these expectations turn into voices she hears in her head, continually judging her and making her doubt her self worth. These pressures may be subtler in our day and age, but they still exert a powerful influence. The more exploratory, aggressive, and darker sides of her character, both naturally occurring and absorbed from the father, will tend to become repressed and sink into the unconscious if she adapts a more traditional female role. The unconscious feminine part of the boy and the man is what Jung calls the anime. The unconscious masculine part of the girl and woman are the animus, because they are parts of ourselves that are deeply buried. We are never really aware of them in our daily life. But once we become fascinated with a person of the opposite sex, the anime and animus stir to life. The attraction we feel toward another might be purely physical, but more often the person who draws our attention unconsciously bears some resemblance, physical or psychological, to our mother or father. Remember that this primal relationship is full of charged energy, excitement, and obsessions that are repressed but yearning to come out. A person who triggers these associations in us will be a magnet for our attention, even though we are not aware of the source of our attraction. If the relationship to the mother or father was mostly positive, we will tend to project onto the other person the desirable qualities that our parent had, in the hope of re experiencing that early paradise. Take, for instance, a young man whose mother nurtured and adored him. He may have been a sweet, loving little boy devoted to his mother and reflecting her nurturing energy, but he repressed these traits in himself as he grew into an independent man with a masculine image to uphold. Interesting. In the woman who triggers an association with his mother, he will see the capacity to adore him that he secretly craves. This feeling of getting what he wants will intensify his excitement and physical attraction. She will supply him the qualities he never developed in himself. He is falling in love with his own anima in the form of the desired woman. In the feelings toward the mother or father were mostly ambivalent, their attention inconsistent. We will often try to fix the original relationship by falling in love with someone who reminds us of our imperfect parent figure, in the hope that we can subtract their negative qualities and get what we never quite got in our earliest years. If the relationship was mostly negative, we may go in search of someone with the opposite qualities to that parent, often of a dark, shadowy nature. For instance, a girl who had a father who was too strict, distant, and critical perhaps had the secret desire to rebel but didn't dare to. As a young woman, she might be drawn to a rebellious, unconventional young man who represents the wild side she was never able to express, and is the polar opposite of her father. The rebel is her animus, now externalized in the form of the young man. In any case, whether the association is positive, negative, or ambivalent, powerful emotions are triggered, and feeling ourselves transported to the primal relationship in our childhood, we act in ways that are often contrary to the persona we present. We become hysterically needy, obsessive, controlling. The anima and animus have their own personalities, and so when they come to life, we act like person B, because we are not really relating to women and men as they are, but rather to our projections. We will eventually feel disappointed in them as if they are to blame for not being what we had imagined. The relationship will often tend to fall apart from the misreading and miscommunications on both sides and not aware of the source of this. We will go through precisely the same cycle with the next person. There are infinite variations on these patterns because everyone has very particular circumstances and mixes of the masculine and feminine. For instance, there are men who are more psychologically feminine than women, and women who are more psychologically masculine than men. If they are heterosexual, the man will be drawn to masculine women who have the qualities he never developed in himself. He has more of an animus than an anima. The woman will be drawn to feminine men. There are many such contrasexual couples, some more overt than others, and they can be successful if both sides get what they want. A famous historical example would be the composer Frederick Chopin and the writer George Sand. Sand being more like the husband and Chopin like the wife. If they are homosexual, the man or woman will still be in search of the contrasexual qualities undeveloped from within. In general, people are imbalanced, over identifying with the masculine or feminine and drawn to the polar opposite. Your task as a student of human nature is threefold. Excuse me. First, you must try to observe the anima and the animus as they manifest themselves in others, particularly in their intimate relationships. By paying attention to their behavior and patterns in these situations, you will have access to their unconscious that is normally denied to you. You will see the parts of themselves they have repressed, and you can use knowledge to great effect. Pay special attention to those who are hyper masculine or hyper feminine. You can be sure that below the surface lurks a very feminine anima for the man and a very masculine animus for the woman. When people go extra far in repressing their feminine or masculine qualities, these will tend to leak out in a curated form. The hypermasculine man, for instance, will be secretly obsessed with clothes and his looks. He will display an unusual interest in people's appearance, including other men, and make rather snippy judgments about them. Richard Nixon desperately tried to project a macho image to those who worked for him as president, but he was constantly commenting on and fussing over the color of the suits they wore and the drapes in his office. The hypermasculine man will express strong opinions about scars, technologies, or politics that are not based on real knowledge, and when called on this, he will become rather hysterical in his defense, throw a tantrum, or pout. He is always trying to contain his emotions, but they can often have a life of their own. For instance, without wanting to, he will suddenly become quite sentimental. The hyperfeminine woman will often be concealing a great deal of repressed anger and resentment at the role she has been forced to play. Her seductive, girlish behavior with men is actually a plow for power, to tease, entrap, and hurt the target. Her masculine side will leak out in a passive-aggressive behavior, attempts to dominate people in relationships in underhanded ways. Underneath the sweet, deferential facade, she can be quite willful and highly judgmental of others. Her willfulness, always under the surface, will come out in rather irrational stubbornness in petty matters. Excuse me. Your second task is to become aware of the projecting mechanism within yourself. See the next section for common types of projections. Projections have a positive role to play in your life, and you cannot stop them even if you wanted to, because they are so automatic and unconscious. Without them, you will not find yourself paying deep attention to a person, becoming fascinated with him or her, idealizing and falling in love. But once the relationship develops, you need to have the power and awareness to withdraw the projections so that you can begin to see women and men as they really are. In doing so, perhaps you will realize how truly incompatible you are, or the opposite. Once connected to the real person, you can continue to idolize him or her, but this will be based on actual positive qualities he or she possesses. Perhaps you can find his or her faults charming. You can accomplish all of this by becoming aware of your own patterns and the types of qualities you tend to project onto others. This also has relevance to relationships with the opposite sex that that are not intimate. Imagine that in an office situation, a colleague criticizes your work or postpones a meeting you asked for. If that person happens to be of the opposite sex, all kinds of emotions, resentments, fears, disappointments, hostilities will be stirred up, along with various projections. Whereas with someone of your own gender, there would be much less of a reaction. Seeing this dynamic in everyday life, you will be better able to control it and have smoother relationships with those of the opposite sex. Your third task is to look inward, to see those feminine or masculine qualities that are repressed and undeveloped within you. You will catch glimpses of your anima or animus in your relationships with the opposite sex. That assertiveness you desire to see in a man or empathy in a woman is something you need to develop within yourself, bringing out that feminine or masculine undertone. What you are doing in essence is integrating into your everyday personality the traits that are within you but are repressed. They will no longer operate independently and automatically in the form of possession. They will become part of your everyday self, and people will be drawn to the uh, authenticity they sense in you. For more on this, see the final section of this chapter. Finally, when it comes to gender roles, we like to imagine a continual line of progress leading to perfect equality, and to believe that we are not far from reaching this idea, but this is hardly the truth. Although on one level we can see definite progress, on another level, one that is deeper, we can see increasing tension and polarization between the sexes, as if the old patterns of inequality between men and women exert an unconscious influence upon us. This tension can sometimes feel like a war, and it stems from a growing psychological distance between the genders, in which people of the opposite sex seem like alien creatures with habits and patterns of behavior we cannot begin to fathom. This distance can turn into hostility among some. Although we can see this in both men and women, the hostility is stronger among men. Perhaps this is related to the latent hostility many men feel toward the mother figure, and the feeling of dependency and weakness she unconsciously triggers. The male sense of masculinity often has a defensive edge that reveals underlying insecurities. Such insecurities has only become more acute with shifting gender roles, and it increases the suspiciousness and hostility between men and women. This outer conflict between the genders, however, is merely a reflection of an unresolved inner conflict. As long as the inner feminine or masculine is denied, the outer distance will only grow. When we bridge this distance from within, our attitude toward the opposite sex changes as well. We feel a deeper connection. We can talk and relate to them as if relating to parts of ourselves. The polarity between the sexes still exists and still causes us to be attracted and fall in love. But now it includes the desire to get closer to the feminine or the masculine. This is much different from the polarization between the genders, in which distance and hostility eventually come to the fore in the relationship and push people further away. The inner connection will vastly improve the outer connection and should be the ideal we aim for. Ooh, that was a little shorter today. In conclusion, pretty much what this chapter was talking about, keys to human nature. What I got from it is pretty much just embracing your masculinity. If you're a man, if you're a woman, embrace your femininity. So, pretty much that's what I got from this from part 2. Yeah, pretty much. Oh, and it kind of went into like the breaking down the different types of masculinity. The hyper masculine man and hyper feminine woman is pretty much knowing the balance between the two, and knowing which one you're starting to scale, which one you're starting to tip over towards most. So, um, yeah, and I'm learning about my masculinity all over again at the age that I'm at now. So it's kind of like, oh shit, like I feel like how it was growing up as a kid, where I didn't have a father figure, so I had to figure out life out. I had to figure life out on my own. So pretty much those same traits, um, I'm pretty much using it, now and going out in the world, even though we're, going through an economic slowdown, you know. So I mean, my thoughts on the wall is, Trump wants the wall. He gets the wall, the economy's gonna move. If Trump doesn't get the wall, the economy's gonna be the way it is, standstill. Nothing's gonna happen. So I think that's his strategy, because he's a Republican Party, and what I've studied, coming up from the '90s. I was born in '78, so that's my era, '78 till now. And I study it, and I noticed like Republican parties always have an agenda for war, and this term for Trump, there hasn't been like an agenda for war. They tried, but nothing successful. So I think like this is pretty much the replacement for agenda for war, the wall, in my opinion. Make like how he keeps talking about make America great is pretty much, what materials are made, to make a wall. Pretty much a lot of American companies like steel, cement, um, those are the two big ones that come off the top of my head. But pretty much he's just trying to strengthen America back up again. And I see that strategy, but a lot of people are just like, shit, the wall, da da da. But we'll see, who else is going to come up with a plan for us. Outro. Subscribe to the channel. Comment any questions you have. Like if the information was inspiring for you. And share this knowledge with other alchemists. Also, follow me on Instagram for more progressive knowledge. My Instagram is Max_Bugatti_8008. I'm all about family first. I'm a global stock investor. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an aerospace botanist. I have a masculine confidence buildings course. And currently, I'm out here in Cali, Colombia until the 4th of February, 2019. While you're slaying dragons, I'll be taming them.